I was thinking recently about how we approach diagnosing a problem. Like when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, for sure. It's very cut and dry.
Right. It's almost like engineering. You
Yeah.
fall off a bike, you break your arm, and the x-ray just shows that stark, jagged white line on a black background.
Yeah.
And the doctor points at it and says, yep, there it is. There's the
Look.
problem. Put a cast on it.
And honestly, that is deeply comforting. I mean, the human brain just completely craves that binary reality, broken or not broken,
Sure.
categorized, visible.
Exactly, because it's this illusion of total control. But then you step into the world of human behavior. You step into group dynamics or corporate management or, heaven forbid, a modern middle school classroom.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole different game.
It really is.
Mm.
Suddenly, that x-ray machine is just completely shattered. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that isn't just a little murky. It is a living, breathing ecosystem of pure chaos.
Because you aren't dealing with a static bone that just stays perfectly still while you examine it. You are stepping into a room containing 30 or more individual, highly reactive nervous systems, and they are all firing simultaneously.
Just a lot to process.
It is.
Mm.
They're processing these complex social hierarchies. They're navigating hormonal surges. And, they're doing it all under terrible fluorescent lighting. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
And that reality, those 30 nervous systems colliding, that is exactly what we are wading into today. I want you, the listener, to try and picture this scenario for a second. Imagine you spend years studying educational theory. You put yourself in massive debt to get a master's degree.
As so many do.
Right. And you sit in these quiet libraries, learning about differentiated instruction and curriculum mapping and all the grand history of pedagogy. You feel so ready to mold the minds of the future.
They've got all the tools.
Exactly. But then all of those beautiful, pristine theories just evaporate into thin air exactly 5 minutes into a Monday morning because a student in the third row has just decided to hide their neighbor's left sneaker inside a ceiling tile.
Which is, it's a very specific and yet entirely universal type of human chaos. It just completely short-circuits traditional academic training.
It really does. And today, we actually have a stack of source material that acts as a literal field manual for surviving that exact kind of short circuit.
Yes, we do.
We are diving deep into a text called the Unspoken Syllabus, 20 Maverick Strategies to Reclaim Your Classroom and Your Sanity. And the author is Robert Walter Fryer III.
And we should probably get some context on him, right?
Definitely. Just to give you some crucial context, this author is not writing from like an ivory tower at a prestigious university. He has spent 13 years in the absolute trenches. He's taught everything from high-level STEM labs to special education departments out in Hawaii.
And that background, that foundational premise of his work is really what makes it so compelling, because standard university programs, the ones granting these advanced degrees, they essentially prepare educators for a phantom.
A phantom? What do you mean?
They prepare you for the ideal student, someone who arrives intrinsically motivated, fully rested, fed, emotionally regulated, and just eager to absorb information.
Which, let's be real, is almost nobody on a Tuesday morning.
Exactly. But this book throws that phantom right out the window. It operates entirely in the realm of biological reality. It treats the classroom not as a quiet academic sanctuary, but as this complex biological and psychological system.
Driven by hidden incentives and stuff?
Yes, hidden incentives, overwhelming cognitive loads, and primitive survival drives.
Which makes this material insanely relevant for anyone, really, not just teachers. If you are listening to this on your commute right now, trying to figure out how to manage a stubborn project team, or survive a hostile board meeting.
Or even just getting your own kids out the door.
Yes. If you just want to know how to get your kids to put on their coats in the morning without a screaming match, you are going to want to take notes, because this is a masterclass in human behavioral psychology. So let's get into the actual logistics of survival here.
Sounds good. Let's start at the beginning.
Well, the most fundamental struggle in any group dynamic, before you even get to teaching or leading or anything, is resource management. How do you get a group of humans to value shared resources and do menial tasks without sparking this massive power struggle?
Right. It's basically a localized version of the tragedy of the commons, but scaled down to a 30 by 30 foot room.
Yeah, exactly. And the author introduces this concept through what he calls the Great Pencil Sinkhole. Now, on paper, a missing pencil seems totally trivial, right?
It's just a 20-cent piece of wood.
Right, a tiny piece of wood and graphite. But to a teacher in the middle of a complex lecture, it is a structural failure. By October, literally hundreds of pencils have just vanished into the ether.
And the traditional solutions usually fail here.
Totally. The approved solutions, like having a sign-out clipboard or, I don't know, designated pencil monitors, they just create these massive, unmanageable administrative bottlenecks. So the author proposes a strategy he calls the shoe hostage.
I remember reading that title and thinking, wow, that sounds intensely adversarial, but the psychology behind it is actually flawlessly calibrated.
I thought the exact same thing when I first read it. But here is the concept. A student needs a pencil. No problem at all, the teacher is well stocked. But the student cannot borrow the pencil. They have to lease it.
And the lease terms are steep.
Yeah. The required collateral for that lease is their left shoe. They actually have to physically take off their shoe, hand it to the teacher, and only then do they get the writing utensil. And when they return the pencil at the end of the period, they get their shoe back.
To understand why this works so effectively, we really have to look at the behavioral economics underlying it, because it rests on three major psychological pillars.
Okay, lay them on me.
The first is a combination of loss aversion and the endowment effect. So in behavioral economics, loss aversion is this well-documented phenomenon where the psychological pain of losing something you already own is twice as powerful as the joy of gaining something of equal or even slightly greater value.
Okay, let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly. So getting the pencil allows them to do their work, which is technically a gain, but losing the shoe is the loss. And the brain just inherently prioritizes the loss.
Exactly. To a student, receiving a generic yellow pencil is a very, very low-value win. I mean, it barely registers on their emotional radar. But losing their own shoe, even if it's just temporarily, is a high-value loss.
That's a big deal.
Huge deal. By demanding the shoe, the teacher bypasses the student's logical brain completely. They trigger a survival-based biological focus on reclaiming their property. The student isn't thinking about the pencil at all. Their brain is fixated entirely on the absence of their footwear.
So the moment the bell rings, they're not rushing out the door.
Right. Their primary biological drive is to execute that trade to become whole again.
But it's not just a mental fixation, right? Because reading the source material, the part that absolutely blew my mind was the physical reality of it. The author talks about proprioceptive feedback and the Zeigarnik effect. Could you break that down for me? Because that feels like an absolute biological cheat code.
Oh, it really is a hack of the human nervous system. Let's start with proprioception. This is essentially your body's unconscious ability to sense its movement, its action, and its location in space.
Okay.
It's that hidden sense that allows you to, say, touch your nose with your eyes closed, or walk up a flight of stairs without staring at your feet. So when a student borrows a pencil under normal circumstances, they just toss it in their pocket or drop it in their backpack, and it completely ceases to exist in their conscious mind.
It just disappears.
Yeah, it has no physical weight to them. But walking around a classroom with one shoe off, that creates a constant, unavoidable state of proprioceptive alarm.
Because their gait is entirely uneven.
Mm.
They're literally limping around the room. I mean, the linoleum floor feels cold on one bare foot and warm on the other shoe.
Precisely. They are physically unbalanced, and the brain absolutely hates physical imbalance. And this physical state creates a psychological open loop, which brings us to the Zeigarnik effect.
Right, the open loop thing. I've heard of this.
Yeah, the Zeigarnik effect dictates that human beings remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks significantly better than completed ones. It was discovered back in the 1920s by a Russian psychologist named Luma Zeigarnik.
How did she figure that out?
Well, the story goes that she was sitting in a bustling cafe in Vienna, just observing the waiters. She noticed these waiters could remember incredibly complex, unpaid orders from large tables perfectly without writing a single thing down.
Wow.
But the very moment the bill was paid and the transaction was complete, the waiters' memories just wiped clean. If you asked them what a table had eaten just 5 minutes after they paid, they couldn't tell you.
Because the brain considers the file closed and just deletes it to save RAM, basically.
Exactly. So the missing shoe is a massive, screaming, uncompleted task. It forces an open loop that stays at the absolute top of the student's cognitive load until that transaction is resolved. They physically and mentally cannot forget the pencil because they cannot forget the shoe.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And the third pillar here is what the author calls a value shift, utilizing the scarcity principle.
Right. When resources are given away freely and infinitely, the human brain automatically assigns them a value of 0. That's exactly why you see students absent-mindedly snapping pencils in half or just leaving them on the floor to be stepped on.
They don't care because there's always more.
Yes. By requiring high-value collateral, you are sending the subconscious signal that for the next 45 minutes, this cheap wooden stick is worth exactly as much as a $150 Nike sneaker. You are artificially inducing scarcity.
Okay, I have to jump in and push back here for a second, because when I first read this, my immediate thought was about the power dynamic. Taking a kid's shoe feels almost aggressive. I mean, what if a student has a massive hole in their sock and they are incredibly self-conscious?
That's a real concern.
Or what if they just flat out refuse? If I'm a manager at a marketing firm and I demand an employee's shoe as collateral for a whiteboard marker, HR is going to escort me out of the building before lunch.
And that is a highly valid critique, which the text actually anticipates perfectly. This is why the author stresses that the implementation of the strategy is just as critical as the psychology behind it. He outlines what he calls the hygiene exception.
Okay, what is that?
If a student is visibly uncomfortable, or if they're wearing sandals, or if there's an obvious odor issue, you do not force the shoe issue. You pivot immediately to an alternative form of collateral.
Like what?
A set of keys, a lanyard, a favorite hoodie, or a single wireless earbud, crucially without the charging case. Those work just as well. The shoe is simply the gold standard because it's the hardest thing to accidentally walk away without.
That makes a lot of sense. You can forget a hoodie on the back of a chair, but you really can't comfortably walk out to the school bus with one bare foot.
Exactly. The other key factor here is the emotional framing. The teacher must maintain a completely neutral, warm, and professional tone. It can never be framed as a punishment or a lack of trust.
It has to feel like a transaction.
Right. It has to be framed as standard operating procedure. The author suggests using a script like, I'm more than happy to supply you with a pencil. I just need a quick deposit for the bin so I can make sure it's here for the next person who needs it.
Ah, the bin.
Yes, notice the detail of the bin. The text explicitly mentions using a dedicated, clean plastic container. You do not just toss their expensive sneaker under your messy desk amidst a pile of crumbs. The physical bin acts as an institutional prop. It makes the exchange look like a formal, established collateral agreement.
Which also brilliantly stops the professional negotiator dead in their tracks.
Yeah.
We all know that kid, or that coworker, honestly. The one who tries to offer a broken hair tie or a crumpled gum wrapper as collateral.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to hold the line. If you accept literal garbage as a deposit, the entire scarcity principle collapses.
Exactly. The collateral must possess a real replacement cost to the borrower, otherwise the resource will not return. The overarching lesson here isn't about pencils at all. It's that you must manage the incentives, not the supplies.
Okay, I buy that. That definitely solves the issue of resource drain. But what about the other side of the logistical coin? How do you get a group of people to actively do the grunt work they desperately want to avoid? The source tackles this with what he calls the secret piece of trash gambit.
This is an absolutely brilliant manipulation of crowd psychology.
I want everyone listening to picture this scenario. It is 2 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. The classroom looks like the aftermath of a ticker tape parade. You've got shredded construction paper, rogue staples, weird plastic bits, and crushed goldfish crackers everywhere.
It's a disaster zone.
It is the classic janitorial standoff. The teacher looks at the room and says, all right, everyone, clean up. And immediately, 30 voices echo back, I didn't drop that. That's not my mess.
It is another localized tragedy of the commons. And this is exactly where typical, logical group mandates fail entirely. If you stand in front of 30 people and say, everyone needs to pick up 5 pieces of trash before we leave, you run face first into 2 massive psychological roadblocks. The diffusion of responsibility and the bystander effect.
Right. The ultimate human default of just assuming someone else will surely do it.
Exactly. Social psychology has proven time and again through the bystander effect that individuals are exponentially less likely to take action or offer help when they are part of a large group. The brain calculates that the responsibility is equally diffused among all present members, which lowers the individual's burden to act to near zero.
So no one moves.
Right. And furthermore, if you give a specific quota-like pick up 5 pieces, they will instantly scan the room, locate the 5 largest, easiest to grab items like whole sheets of paper, toss them away, and leave thousands of pieces of micro trash embedded in the carpet.
They found the loophole.
Yes. They technically fulfilled the contract, but the room is still a disaster.
So the author's solution to this is just wild. You stand at the front of the room, you get their attention, and you announce that you have mentally selected one specific secret piece of trash currently on this floor.
It's so clever.
It is. You tell them whoever picks up the secret piece and places it in the garbage bin gets a reward. Usually a tiny non-monetary privilege, like getting to choose the playlist for the next 10 minutes. When I read this, my mind instantly went to Willy Wonka's golden ticket. You are taking a miserable, demoralizing chore and transforming it into a high-stakes scavenger hunt.
It completely flips the dynamic of the room. But we really have to ask why the human brain reacts so differently to a scavenger hunt compared to a direct, logical command. And the answer goes all the way back to behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner and his work on operant conditioning.
Okay, bringing in Skinner.
Specifically, this gambit employs a variable ratio reinforcement scheduling.
Variable ratio, is that the same mechanism behind gambling?
It is the exact same psychological architecture that makes slot machines so wildly addictive. In a fixed ratio schedule, say you get $1 for every 5 pieces of trash, the brain knows exactly what the payout is, and the motivation plateaus very quickly.
It just becomes a math problem.
Right. But in a variable ratio schedule, the reward is unpredictable. Because the students have no idea which tiny scrap of paper is the golden ticket, their brains are intensely incentivized to pick up every single piece of trash they can find to mathematically increase their odds of hitting the jackpot.
You're leveraging their evolutionary desire for a high probability win.
Yes. You're hooking into that very primal drive.
It's unbelievable. I mean, you watch them go from whining about a single staple to literally army crawling under desks to hoard scraps of paper. The text even mentions that it pushes them into a mini flow state.
Yeah, by introducing gamification, you shift the activity from being an extrinsic chore, something forced upon them by an authority figure, to an intrinsic challenge. The brain gets so hyper-focused on scanning the environment for micro-trash that the students literally forget they're performing unpaid janitorial labor. The task just becomes the game.
But here is the absolute best part of this whole thing. The true sleight of hand. The author reveals what he calls the Schrodinger's trash rule.
This is the genius part.
It really is. He admits that you don't even need to pick a specific piece of trash in advance. You literally just stand there with a neutral poker face, watch the room scramble, and observe who is working the hardest. And after 2 minutes, when the floor is spotless, you just magically decide that the piece the hardest worker just threw away was the secret one.
It is delightfully deceptive, but functionally perfect. By waiting to assign the winning piece, you guarantee that the student putting in the most effort is always the one rewarded. You are perfectly reinforcing the exact behavior you want to cultivate for the future.
So smart.
But the critical caveat is that you must maintain the mystery. When a student runs up to you with a handful of wrappers and asks, "Is it this one? Is this the winner?" you cannot confirm or deny. You have to reply, "I can't tell you. The rule is you have to put it in the bin to find out."
Because if you say yes before it's in the garbage, they just drop it back on the floor.
Exactly. The action must be fully completed before the reward is granted.
Oh, I am absolutely stealing Schrodinger's trash for when my nephews come over and destroy the living room. It's too good. Okay, so we've stopped the physical bleed of resources, and we've tricked everyone into cleaning the floor. But the physical space is really only half the battle.
That's true.
When a principal or a regional manager walks into your space for an evaluation, they aren't counting your pencils or checking for dust. They are making massive, instantaneous judgments about your overall competence based purely on how the room looks.
Which brings us to the management of perception, controlling the visual environment.
Exactly. And the source tackles this in a chapter titled The Decoy Desk, which might honestly be my favorite concept in the entire book. The author confronts this pervasive, culturally ingrained myth that a messy desk equals a messy, disorganized mind.
A very harmful myth, by the way.
Yeah. Now, if you are a working professional in any fast-paced industry, your desk is probably a disaster area because you are actively doing things. But in the education system, administrators rely on these quick 5-minute walkthrough evaluations. If they walk in and see a hurricane of ungraded papers, sticky notes, and half-empty coffee cups, they judge you harshly.
They absolutely do.
So the solution: the decoy desk.
It is a phenomenal defense mechanism against cognitive bias.
The strategy is this. You take your real, chaotic, functioning desk, what the author calls your battle map, and you tuck it away in a corner out of the direct line of sight from the door. Then, right near the entrance, you set up a pristine, highly visible secondary station, a small table or a rolling cart.
Just for show.
Exactly. And on this decoy desk, you place only 3 things: a perfectly aligned planner, maybe a small vase of fake flowers, and a very official-looking binder labeled State Standards. That's it. It's a museum exhibit of professionalism.
If we unpack the psychology here, the author is weaponizing 2 incredibly powerful cognitive phenomena: thin slicing and the halo effect.
Let's start with thin slicing.
Okay. Thin slicing is a concept popularized by Malcolm Gladwell. The human brain consumes a massive amount of caloric energy. So to save power, it has evolved to make rapid subconscious judgments based on very narrow windows or thin slices of experience.
Right, because we don't have time to analyze everything.
Exactly. We don't have time to analyze every single detail of a new environment, so we scan for immediate visual cues to determine safety, hierarchy, and competence.
So when the principal walks through that door, their brain takes a literal snapshot of the room, and that decoy desk is the very first thin slice of data they process.
Exactly. It anchors their entire perception. And that initial positive data point immediately triggers the halo effect. The halo effect is a cognitive bias where our overall impression of a person or a space heavily influences how we feel about their character in completely unrelated areas.
So it bleeds over.
Yes. If the evaluator's first visual thin slice is a beautifully organized, aesthetically pleasing station, their brain automatically assigns the broader traits of competent, prepared, and highly organized to your entire professional persona.
They see the fake flowers in the binder, and they subconsciously assume your lesson plans are flawless, your grading is up to date, and you are just a master of your craft, even if they only stay in the room for 60 seconds.
The author also brilliantly connects this strategy to the broken windows theory.
Oh, applying urban criminology to interior design.
Yes, the theory originally suggested that visible signs of disorder in a neighborhood, like a broken window or a graffiti signal that no one is in charge, which encourages further disorder and crime. In an evaluative setting, if a principal sees a chaotic, cluttered desk, they are psychologically primed to actively hunt for clutter in your teaching.
They're looking for the broken windows in your lesson.
Right. They will suddenly notice that your transition to math was a bit messy, or that two kids in the back are whispering. But the pristine decoy desk signals high order. It preemptively shuts down the critic's search for flaws because their brain has already categorized you as in control.
I have to play devil's advocate for a second here. When I was reading this, a part of me thought, well, isn't this basically just lying to your boss? You are essentially creating a fake diorama of competence to trick them while hiding your real methy reality in the corner.
It's a very fair ethical question, it really is. But I wouldn't classify it as deception. I would classify it as translating your competence into a language the evaluator can actually understand in a constrained time frame.
That's an interesting way to put it.
The author makes a compelling argument that a deeply engaged, busy teacher must have a messy desk to function. You are simultaneously managing dozens of individual education plans, grading rubrics, behavioral charts, and logistics. A working desk is a messy desk.
It's proof of work.
Exactly. But you are forced to survive within a flawed bureaucratic evaluation system that relies on rapid, superficial visual judgments. You aren't faking your underlying competence. You're simply providing a visual shorthand for that competence to satisfy the evaluator's cognitive biases.
Providing a visual shorthand for competence. I love that. That completely reframes it. And for anyone listening who works in a corporate office, this is exactly why you hide your chaotic, messy whiteboard brainstorms in a digital folder. But you keep a pristine, color-coded planner out on your desk.
Yep.
You aren't fooling your boss. You are managing their visual thin slicing. And the text says you should actively associate yourself with it, right? When the boss walks in, you physically move your body to stand next to the decoy desk.
Yes, you want to anchor their perception of you directly to that clean space. But this concept of managing perceptions extends far beyond inanimate objects like desks. It extends directly into how you manage the people who hold the real power in the building.
Which brings us to Chapter 12. Front Office Diplomacy. The author talks about the profound isolation of teaching and how to survive it by tapping into the informal power structure. Because if you look at the official organizational chart of a school or a hospital or a massive corporate firm, the principal or the CEO sits at the very top. They have the formal authority.
Right, on paper.
On paper, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyone who has ever worked in an institution knows that the administrative assistants, the secretaries, and the custodians are the ones who actually run the building.
This is a foundational concept in organizational sociology. Every institution on Earth possesses a formal structure and an informal structure. Support staff hold immense informal power because they operate as the central information hubs.
They see everything.
They do. They control the flow of physical resources, they manage the intricate schedules, and most importantly, they hold the institutional memory. They know where the bodies are buried, so to speak.
So how do you practically tap into that informal power? The author uses Stephen Covey's concept of building emotional bank accounts through the rule of reciprocity.
It's vital to view relationships transactionally in this specific context. Every interaction you have with the front office is either a deposit or a withdrawal. The vast majority of people only approach support staff to make withdrawals.
Like demanding extra copy paper.
Exactly. They demand paper, they complain about a broken air conditioner, they need a last-minute favor. If that is your only mode of interaction, your account is constantly overdrawn. The staff will view you as a burden, and when you ask for something, they will follow the rules strictly by the book.
No, you cannot have the master key. You have to fill out Form 8B in triplicate and wait 3 days.
Precisely. But if you make consistent, intentional deposits, like learning their names, bringing them a coffee on a Tuesday for no reason, saying thank you, and just treating them as actual human beings rather than utility dispensers, you build massive social capital.
You're funding the account.
Yes. And you trigger what Dr. Robert Cialdini calls the rule of reciprocity. This is a deep evolutionary drive embedded in human nature to return a favor. When you inevitably have a massive crisis, say you forget to submit your field trip paperwork and the buses are arriving in 10 minutes, they won't just do their job.
They'll save you.
They will actively go out of their way, bend the rules, and move mountains to solve your problem because they feel a subconscious obligation to balance the emotional ledger.
It's just treating people with dignity, but understanding the strategic return on that dignity. And the author applies this exact same diplomatic psychology to substitute teachers with what he calls the subfolder decoy.
Which is a brilliant practical application of social identity theory.
So think about the normal protocol when you call in sick. You drag yourself out of bed and email in a clinical 30-page manual of your daily schedule, behavior flowcharts, and emergency procedures.
It's so much information.
It is. The substitute walks in, sees this massive tome, feels completely overwhelmed, and by 10 a.m., the students have eaten them alive.
Because that 30-page manual induces massive extraneous cognitive load. If we look at cognitive load theory, it identifies different types of mental effort. For a substitute teacher walking into a strange room, facing 30 unknown names, and navigating a new schedule, their extraneous load, the mental effort required just to understand the environment is already maximized.
They're already at capacity.
Right. To use an analogy, imagine trying to learn how to drive a manual transmission car for the first time, but the windshield is covered in mud and the radio is blasting heavy metal at maximum volume.
Yeah, it sounds like a nightmare.
It is. The mud and the noise are the extraneous load. It's consuming the brainpower you desperately need just to figure out where the clutch is. If a substitute spends 90% of their brainpower trying to decipher your complex filing system, they have literally zero bandwidth left for actual classroom management.
That makes perfect sense. So instead of the manual, you leave a social blueprint right on the decoy desk, just a single front page that actively humanizes you. You give them the insider secrets. You write, here are the 3 reliable kids who will help you with the projector. Here's a kid who is going through a tough time at home and just needs a little extra grace today.
And by doing that, you are leveraging social identity theory. Humans naturally categorize the world into in-groups and out-groups. Students inherently view a substitute teacher as the ultimate out-group member, which psychologically justifies their rebellion and misbehavior.
Right, they're the outsider.
But by giving the substitute this intimate insider knowledge, you are psychologically pulling them into the in-group. You are handing them the keys to your classroom culture. When the substitute casually uses that insider info when they ask the reliable kid for help by name, the student's perception shifts. They suddenly view the substitute as having a direct, endorsed connection to you, the primary authority figure.
The source also mentions using the pratfall effect in this note. How does that work?
The pratfall effect is a fascinating psychological phenomenon where an individual's perceived likability and trustworthiness actually increase after they make a small mistake or admit a flaw, provided they are generally perceived as competent.
Okay, so how do you use it in the note?
So by leaving a note for the sub that says, I'll be honest, my transition from reading to lunch is always a total mess, so please don't sweat it if it gets loud, you are intentionally admitting a personal weakness. This profoundly humanizes you to the guest teacher. It removes their fear of your judgment, validates their inevitable struggle, and builds immediate, deep trust.
You're treating them like an honored VIP guest, not a disposable placeholder. I love that. All right, let's look at the bigger picture. We've controlled the physical space, we've managed the visual optics with the decoy desk, and we've built alliances with the adults through diplomacy. Now we have to tackle the most chaotic, physically exhausting element of any room full of humans.
Sound and movement.
Exactly. We are entering the realm of auditory warfare.
which is undeniably the primary drain on an educator's physical and neurological stamina.
Without a doubt. Chapter 2 talks about the grave danger of the teacher's voice devolving into white noise. When a classroom or a conference room gets loud, our immediate primal instinct is to yell over the noise. We try to use sheer volume to reclaim authority. We want to be the loudest thing in the room. But the author argues that yelling just adds heat to an already boiling system.
It creates a dangerous, escalating feedback loop. You raise your volume to be heard. The students subconsciously raise their volume to match yours. You yell louder, they get louder.
And it just spirals.
Eventually, your voice is stripped of all authority and it just becomes a background hum. The human brain simply filters it out as environmental noise.
So the author's solution is what he calls tactical silence, combined with a physical posture he calls the invisible crown. When the room is spiraling into chaos, you don't say a word. You stop speaking mid-sentence. You remain perfectly, statuesquely still, and you place your hands softly above your head, as if you're wearing an invisible crown. And you just wait.
The neurobiology at play in this moment is spectacular. First, you are leveraging sensory adaptation against the contrast effect.
Tell me more about that.
The human brain is biologically wired to detect changes in the environment, not constants. A loud, chaotic room is a constant state. When you suddenly cease all vocalization, you create a massive contrast shock. Paradoxically, the sudden absence of your voice becomes the loudest and most startling thing in the room.
Wow, the silence is louder than yelling.
Yes, it triggers what neuroscientists call the orienting response, a primitive evolutionary reflex that forces a mammal to stop what it's doing and look toward the source of an environmental shift to assess for danger.
Because their lizard brain is saying, wait, the environment just changed drastically. Why did the big human stop making noise? Is there a predator? But what about the stillness? Why not just stand there with your arms crossed like a normal, frustrated person?
That connects directly to mirror neurons. We are a deeply social species, biologically programmed to mimic the emotional and physical states of those around us. If you are frantically pacing, waving your arms, and yelling, the students' nervous systems will mirror that frantic fight-or-flight energy.
So they feed off your stress.
Exactly. But if you stand perfectly still in a high-status, relaxed pose, you force their mirror neurons to synchronize with your absolute calm. You are actively, biologically down-regulating their nervous systems without their consent.
Down-regulating their nervous systems without their consent. That is a powerful phrase. But what about the hands over the head? Why the invisible crown? Why not just stand with your hands in your pockets?
That specific posture utilizes the bizarreness effect. Cognitive psychology shows that unexpected, incongruous, or bizarre information is processed faster and remembered much more vividly than common information.
Okay, that makes sense.
A teacher standing at the front of the room waiting for quiet is common. A teacher standing like a frozen statue with their hands hovering above their head is bizarre. It creates immediate cognitive dissonance. The students' brains cannot reconcile the weirdness of your physical pose with the chaos of the room, so they naturally stop talking to try and resolve the dissonance and figure out what you are doing.
It's basically a game of vocal chicken, and you win by completely refusing to play. It's genius. So let's move from silence to the exact opposite side of the spectrum. Chapter 8 is called Cinematic Pressure. The source states a mind-blowing statistic. Teachers lose up to 90 hours of instructional time a year just to dead air during transitions.
90 hours is staggering.
Moving from math to reading, packing up bags, lining up for lunch, and traditional verbal countdowns like yelling you have 1 minute left, they completely fail.
They fail because verbal cues lack a visceral biological sense of urgency, and crucially, they invite negotiation. Just 1 more minute, please.
So the author's hack is to play high-stakes heist music. He literally uses the Mission Impossible theme song. You don't say a single word, you just hit play on the speakers, and the music acts as a strict, unyielding auditory timer. I absolutely love this concept.
It's a great reframe.
It's like taking a boring, tedious Tuesday morning and turning it into the climax of a Hollywood action movie. Suddenly, putting your math workbook into your desk feels like you are disarming a nuclear bomb.
It's incredibly effective, and it operates on 2 psychological levels. First, it utilizes Parkinson's law, the adage which states that work expands to fill the time available for its completion.
Right, if you have 10 minutes, it takes 10 minutes.
Exactly. If transition time is undefined, a student will take 5 minutes to put away a pencil. The 2-minute song creates a hard, non-negotiable external ceiling. But more importantly, from a physiological standpoint, it triggers rhythmic entrainment.
Entrainment. Is that the biological glitch that makes my foot start tapping at a rock concert without me even realizing I'm doing it? Like my nervous system is being hijacked by the bass line?
That is the exact mechanism. Inside your brain, you have internal oscillators. Think of them as internal metronomes that dictate your physical pacing and motor functions. When you introduce an external auditory stimulus with a heavy driving tempo, around 120 to 140 beats per minute, which most action scores are, those internal metronomes literally sync up with the music.
The brain matches the beat.
Yes. The student's motor cortex synchronizes with their auditory cortex. Their physical movements subconsciously accelerate to match the tempo of the room. You are using the physics of sound waves to physically move their bodies faster without uttering a single command.
And it completely changes the emotional tone of the stress, right? Because transitions are usually stressful in a bad way.
Yes, it transforms distress, which is anxiety-inducing bad stress, into eustress. Eustress is motivating, gamified, positive stress. The swelling music triggers a minor release of adrenaline that increases focus, pushing the group into a mini flow state where they move as a single, highly efficient unit. It's exhilarating rather than exhausting.
Okay, so we are managing the big, room-wide noises and movements. But what about the little insidious noises, what the author calls the death by 1,000 interruptions?
The micro distraction.
Yeah, picture this. You are in the middle of this beautiful, complex, deeply engaging explanation of the historical event. The kids are hooked, and a kid in the front row raises their hand. You think they have a profound, insightful question. You call on them, and they say, "Can I go to the bathroom?"
Which instantly shatters the sanctity of the lesson. All the momentum is dead.
Exactly. Every single time you stop your academic momentum to answer a mundane administrative question, you break the flow. So the author strongly advocates for a hand signal language. One finger raised means I need a pencil, two fingers crossed means I need the bathroom, and a flat hand means an actual academic question.
If we look at this through the lens of cognitive science, we are talking about mitigating task switching cost. The human brain is not actually capable of true multitasking. It just rapidly switches attention between tasks.
We just bounce back and forth.
Right. When you shift your focus from a high-level cognitive task, like synthesizing historical facts, to a low-level administrative task, like evaluating bathroom permissions, your brain literally has to unload the rules of the first task and load the rules for the second.
And that takes energy.
The switching cost is the measurable loss of speed, accuracy, and cognitive momentum. By the time you switch your brain back to the history lesson, the students have checked out.
I understand the problem, but how do hand signals actually prevent that switching cost? You still have to look at the kid and process the request, right?
Yes, but you process it through an entirely different neurological channel. Verbal interruptions are extrinsic distractors that demand auditory processing, pulling your speech centers out of the lesson. Hand signals move the request completely to the visual channel.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Because they are silent and static, they are processed by your peripheral vision and your visual cortex, which requires significantly less executive cognitive effort. You can give a subtle, barely perceptible nod to the student requesting the bathroom while your auditory loop and speech centers remain completely, uninterruptedly focused on delivering the narrative of the lesson. You are handling the administration as a background process.
It's like having a dual-core processor in your brain. You have one core running the lesson program and the other core quietly handling the operating system logistics in the background. And speaking of auditory background processes, Chapter 15 expands on this idea to cover the soundtrack of learning. Using music as what he calls a mood ring, the author makes a very strong claim that playing popular music with lyrics while students are working is actually terrible for their focus.
He is absolutely correct, and cognitive psychology explains exactly why through a phenomenon known as the irrelevant speech effect.
What's that?
The human brain has a specific subsystem in working memory called the phonological loop, which is entirely dedicated to processing language. If a student is trying to read a textbook or write an essay, they are heavily utilizing that phonological loop to process the words on the page.
So it's already busy.
Very busy. If you are playing popular music with lyrics in the background, the brain cannot help but process those sung words. It is forced to process two competing streams of language simultaneously. This severely overloads the cognitive capacity of the loop, leading to rapid mental fatigue and disastrously poor reading comprehension.
So you have to eliminate the lyrics. You use specific instrumental tracks to create what he calls auditory anchors. You play lo-fi hip-hop beats for deep, independent writing and maybe upbeat instrumental jazz for collaborative group work.
It is a practical application of classical conditioning. If you consistently over weeks pair a specific lo-fi track with the expectation of silent, independent work, the brain physically wires those two things together.
They become linked.
Eventually, the music becomes a conditioned stimulus. Just hearing the first 4 bars of that specific song triggers the release of neurotransmitters associated with focus, completely bypassing the student's usual conscious resistance to getting to work.
It's Pavlov's bell, but for writing essays. And the author notes that if the kids come in super hyper, say, right after recess or a fire drill, you don't just blast calm, bomb music at them. That causes whiplash. You use something called the ISO principle.
Correct. The ISO principle is a technique borrowed from clinical music therapy. It dictates that to change someone's mood, you must first match their current emotional and physiological state, and then gradually fade the music into the desired state.
So you meet them where they are?
If they come in vibrating with energy, you start with an upbeat, high-tempo instrumental track to match their high arousal. It validates their current state. Then, over the course of 5 to 7 minutes, you subtly crossfade to slower, calmer tempos. You are literally taking the steering wheel of their nervous system and gently driving it down to a state of calm.
Okay, I want to pause here and review where we are. We have silenced the chaotic noise.
Yeah.
We have established flow with music. We have controlled the physical and visual environment. But here is the massive hurdle. How do you actually make them want to learn? Because you can have a perfectly quiet room full of kids sitting up straight who are totally, utterly checked out mentally. You have to figure out how to manipulate their dopamine and their inherent fear of failure.
Exactly. You are transitioning from environmental management, getting them to sit still, to neurochemical engagement, getting them to think.
Right. And the very first tool the author provides for this is the mystery box strategy from Chapter 7. He addresses the Monday morning fog where everyone is exhausted and apathetic. Instead of doing a tap dance or a high-energy performance to wake them up, he suggests just placing a locked, physical box at the front of the room.
Just letting it sit there.
Yeah. You don't explain it. You don't make a grand announcement. You just mention offhandedly that it won't be opened until the class masters a specific academic goal for the day.
This is a beautiful, elegant application of information gap theory, which was proposed by the behavioral economist George Lowenstein. Lowenstein argued that curiosity is not just an interest. It is essentially a cognitive form of deprivation.
Deprivation.
Yes. When we notice a gap between what we currently know and what we want to know, it produces a literal mental itch, a feeling of slight discomfort. Think of it like a really good movie trailer that cuts to black right at the climax.
Oh, that is the worst feeling.
Right, but it makes you want to see the movie. The locked box is a physical, undeniable manifestation of that knowledge gap. The human brain is biologically wired to resolve anomalies in its environment, so it remains in a state of heightened, uncomfortable alertness until the box is opened.
This reminds me so much of J.J. Abrams and his famous TED Talk about the mystery box in storytelling. The idea that the unseen is infinitely more compelling than the seen. But biologically, it's also about the dopamine hit, isn't it?
Precisely. Neuroscience has shown us, particularly through studies on reward prediction error, that dopamine, which we commonly think of as the reward chemical, but is actually the motivation chemical, spikes much, much higher during the anticipation of a reward than during the actual receipt of the reward itself.
So the waiting is better than the prize.
Yes. If you tell the class, if you finish this worksheet, you get 5 minutes of free time, that is a known prize. It provides a small, predictable dopamine spike. But an unknown prize hidden inside a locked box. That creates what we call incentive salience. The potential for a massive, unprecedented win keeps the dopamine levels elevated and surging for the entire class period.
It converts perceptual curiosity, meaning, what is that weird physical box, into epistemic curiosity, meaning I need to learn this complex math equation right now so we can open the box.
Yeah.
But I have to push back here because I remember middle school. What if a kid acts too cool for school? What if they lean back in their chair, cross their arms, look at you and say, I don't care what's in your stupid box. Keep it locked.
It's the classic defense mechanism of apathy. But the author's counter to this is incredibly astute regarding adolescent psychology. He advises that you completely ignore the apathy.
Don't fight them on it.
Do not engage in a power struggle. You focus entirely on the engaged students. When the academic goal is finally met and it's time to reveal the contents, you don't hold it up for the whole room to see. You use the whisper technique. You open it slightly and let small groups come up and peek inside quietly.
Oh, wow.
When that cool kid is sitting in the back, and they see their peer group experiencing genuine, authentic excitement and whispering to each other, their social brain activates. The biological need to be part of the group's shared experience, to not be left out of the tribe, will almost always override their defensive apathy. They will eventually crane their neck to see.
That is brilliant, using peer FOMO for academic good. Now let's talk about the absolute scariest moment in any classroom, or frankly any corporate boardroom, the wait time stare down. Chapter 13. You ask a complex, multi-layered question, and you are met with absolute, deafening silence. The text states a deeply depressing statistic. Most teachers crack under this pressure and break the silence in just 1.5 seconds.
Yes, 1.5 seconds is the average time before an educator or a manager rescues the room by rephrasing the question, answering it themselves, or just calling on the exact same person who always knows the answer.
But the author's strategy is to endure the silence, to wait an agonizing 10 to 15 seconds. You just stand there looking expectant. I have tried this in meetings, and 10 seconds feels like an hour. Why is this so incredibly hard to do, and why is it so necessary?
It is intensely difficult because of the social pressure of unresolved tension. We are conditioned to view silence in a group setting as a failure of communication. But it is absolutely necessary because of a biological reality called retrieval latency.
What's retrieval latency?
Think of the human brain not as a lightning-fast Google search engine, but as a massive, slightly disorganized physical library. When you ask a complex question, a student must first decode the auditory signal of your words, then search their long-term memory archives, retrieve the relevant data, pull it into working memory, synthesize a coherent thought, and finally translate that thought into a verbal response while evaluating the social risk of speaking out loud.
That's a huge process.
That complex biological process takes actual physical time. By waiting a full 10 to 15 seconds, you are providing the necessary cognitive runway required for a deep-level insight to form, rather than accepting a surface-level, panicked guess.
And it's the difference between asking someone to recall what they had for breakfast versus asking them to explain the geopolitical causes of World War I. You have to give the brain time to boot up the heavy machinery. And the social tension you mentioned actually ends up working in your favor, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human psychology. As those seconds tick by 3, 4, 5, 6, the social tension in the room becomes physically palpable. It gets heavy. Eventually, someone will answer just to break the uncomfortable silence and relieve the pressure. And very often, because you've given them time to process, it is the student who usually never speaks up, but they just couldn't stand the vacuum anymore.
Okay, so the quiet kid finally speaks up to break the silence. But what if they are totally, completely wrong? How you handle that moment dictates the culture of the room. And that brings us to Chapter 17, the mistake celebration. This is entirely about dismantling the perfectionist trap where kids are terrified of looking stupid in front of their peers. The author suggests a radical approach. When you, the teacher, make a genuine mistake on the whiteboard, you don't quickly erase it and mumble an apology. You make a massive, joyful, theatrical deal out of it.
You highlight it.
Yeah, you point and say, look, I just wrote that 2 plus 2 is 5. My brain just grew. Who caught my mistake? It's like breaking the fourth wall in a theater production to show the audience the boom mic. You are intentionally showing them the messy, flawed mechanics of learning.
This specific behavior is the foundational bedrock for creating what Harvard professor Amy Edmondson calls psychological safety. Psychological safety is the shared belief within a group that you will not be punished, humiliated, or marginalized for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes.
You take away the fear.
In a psychologically safe room, the massive interpersonal risk of being wrong is removed. And when that fear is removed, it frees up a tremendous amount of cognitive resources that can now be applied to higher-order critical thinking.
And there's an actual, measurable neurological benefit to making mistakes.
Right.
It's not just about feeling good.
Absolutely. The neuroscience of learning shows that when you make a mistake, realize it, and correct it, the brain experiences significantly stronger synaptic plasticity, the strengthening of neural connections, than if you had simply repeated the correct answer perfectly the first time. The struggle builds the muscle.
But there is a biological catch.
Yes, there is. The brain emits an electrical signal called error-related negativity, or ERN, the exact millisecond we realize we've messed up. You know that hot flush in your face and the dropping sensation in your stomach when you hit reply all on an embarrassing email?
Oh, I know that feeling all too well.
That is the ERN firing. In a high-stress, punitive environment, the EARN triggers a massive cortisol threat response. It tells the body you are in danger. But by openly celebrating mistakes out loud, the teacher effectively hacks the student's EARN response. They rewire it from a signal of social death into a signal of positive social inclusion and growth.
You are literally teaching their nervous system how to be wrong with grace. That is profound. Okay, I want to take a breath and zoom out. We have spent the first 4 sections of this deep dive learning how to hack the students, how to manipulate the environment, and how to mold the psychology of the room. But here is the harsh reality. None of this works. Absolutely none of it if the person running the room burns out and collapses.
The human element.
Right. The architect of the behavior must be preserved. So we have to turn the psychological lens away from the classroom and point it directly at you, the listener. Let's talk about preserving the educator.
This is perhaps the most vital section of the book because the biological limits of the human nervous system apply to the teacher just as ruthlessly as they apply to the student. You cannot outthink your own biology.
Exactly. Chapter 5 introduces a concept called culinary diplomacy. The author points out a staggering statistic. Teachers make an estimated 1,500 decisions a day. Can I go to the bathroom? Is this answer right? Who hit who? That volume of choices causes massive decision fatigue.
It drains you completely.
By 3 p.m., you are not just tired, you are running on cognitive fumes. So he suggests a highly specific countermeasure, a secret tiered chocolate stash. Tier 1 is cheap, mass-market candy for the daily grind. Tier 2 is gourmet chocolate for surviving formal observations or tough meetings. And Tier 3 is the ultra-premium, expensive chocolate hidden inside a boring box of staples reserved only for absolute, catastrophic, tear-inducing days.
While it sounds like a lighthearted joke about stress eating, it is actually a highly strategic delivery system for glucose and dopamine. Self-control, patience, and executive function physically consume glucose in the brain.
It's physical fuel.
Yes. When you make 1,000 decisions, your blood sugar drops and your willpower diminishes accordingly. A state psychologists refer to as ego depletion. A targeted, intentional hit of glucose provides immediate biological fuel for the prefrontal cortex, bringing your patients back online.
And what about the dopamine aspect? Why does it have to be tiered?
The ritual of selecting and eating a high-value, rare treat releases a surge of dopamine, which actively shifts your internal narrative from, I am suffering through this terrible day, to I am enduring this and earning this specific high-level reward.
It changes the story you tell yourself.
Furthermore, the physical act of sitting down to mindfully eat that Tier 3 chocolate acts as a self-soothing ritual. It forces your body out of the sympathetic fight-or-flight state, lowering your heart rate, and shifts you into the parasympathetic rest and digest state.
It's emotional and biological triage. And alongside managing your blood sugar, you have to manage your physical body. Chapter 14 talks about what he calls the hybrid wardrobe. There is this massive conflict in education. You're expected to dress like a professional, authoritative academic, but you walk 15,000 steps a day on hard linoleum like a marathon runner.
Which creates a constant, draining conflict between visual aesthetics and physical functionality.
So the author says you must invest in stealth comfort. You buy shoes that look exactly like professional leather wingtips, but have the thick rubber soles of running sneakers. You buy slacks made of 4-way stretch tech fabric. Because, as the expert analysis in the book points out, what you wear actually changes how your brain functions.
Yes, the psychological term for this is enclothed cognition. Research has consistently shown that wearing professional, authoritative attire actually increases a person's abstract thinking, their attention to detail, and their confidence.
Like wearing a suit on a Zoom call even if you don't have to.
Exactly. But if those professional clothes cause physical pain, if your shoes are pinching or your tie is too tight, your executive function is constantly being hijacked by the brain to monitor and manage those pain signals. The hybrid wardrobe is the perfect compromise. It gives you the cognitive and authoritative boost of looking professional while preserving your mental bandwidth from pain management. It also utilizes affordance theory.
What's affordance theory?
Comfortable clothes afford or subconsciously encourage dynamic movement, allowing you to walk the room freely and be a more engaging presence.
Okay, so you got your comfortable shoes, you've eaten your Tier 2 chocolate, and you've survived the physical day. The final bell rings. The kids leave. Now what? Because this is where most people fail. Chapter 6 introduces the 2-minute landing. The rule is, when the room empties, you do not immediately start grading papers, you do not open your laptop, and you do not look at your phone. You sit in your chair in absolute zero-input stillness for 120 seconds.
This practice directly addresses the neurological concept of attention residue. When you switch rapidly from a high-intensity task like teaching a loud class to a different task like grading essays or driving your car home, a significant portion of your cognitive attention remains stuck on the previous task.
You're still living it.
You are still mentally arguing with the kid who wouldn't sit down. The 2-minute landing acts as a cognitive squeegee. It allows the neural residue to settle and clear.
It's a deliberate boundary ritual.
Exactly. It prevents what psychologists call role spillover. That's the dangerous phenomenon where you accidentally take your authoritative teacher persona home with you and you start treating your spouse or your own children like misbehaving middle schoolers.
Which never goes over well.
Never. By sitting in total stillness, you acknowledge the chaos of the day and the uncompleted tasks, those Zeigarnik open loops we discussed earlier, without impulsively acting on them. This signals to your brain that the threat has passed, which lowers cortisol and formally completes the biological stress cycle.
But to truly protect your home life, to truly leave work at work, you have to disconnect from what the author calls the Pavlovian pocket, your smartphone. And Chapter 11 is all about using the scheduled send feature for emails. This is huge for corporate listeners, too. When an anxious parent or a demanding boss emails you at 9 p.m., you might sit on the couch and write the reply right then to get it off your plate. But you never hit send. You schedule it to send at 7:45 a.m. the next morning.
Because if you hit reply at 9:10 p.m., you are actively using operant conditioning to train that parent or that boss to expect 24/7 availability. You are providing immediate positive reinforcement for their late-night boundary intrusion.
You essentially turn yourself into a 24-hour convenience store.
Yeah.
They know if they ring the bell, you will answer.
Right. By utilizing the scheduled send to delay the reply until contract hours, you are employing the psychological principle of extinction. The behavior emailing late at night no longer results in the immediate reward of your attention, so over time their expectation diminishes and the behavior stops.
That helps you too.
Plus, it serves your brain perfectly. It closes your internal cognitive loop because you've handled the task and written the email, but you aren't inviting a rapid-fire response that will drag you into a stressful conversation at 10 p.m.
But let's be real for a second. I feel like teachers, nurses, and frankly a lot of driven professionals are riddled with profound guilt if they aren't constantly working or sacrificing. How do you get past that internal guilt of setting those boundaries?
That guilt is exactly what Chapter 19 targets, the grace protocol. To survive, we have to aggressively dismantle the cultural myth of the hero teacher.
You mean the movie trope. The teacher who works 90 hours a week, buys all the supplies with their own money, has no personal life, and miraculously saves every single student through sheer martyrdom.
Exactly. That pervasive cultural myth leads directly to the planning fallacy, where educators constantly plan their weeks assuming they will always have 100% emotional energy, perfect health, and compliant students.
Which is impossible.
When reality inevitably hits, when they get a cold, or the projector breaks, or the lesson bombs, they engage in harsh, destructive self-criticism. But neurobiologically, intense self-criticism is processed by the brain as an internal threat signal. It spikes cortisol and literally shuts down the prefrontal cortex.
Wait, so beating yourself up for having a bad day actually makes you biologically dumber and a worse teacher?
Biologically and functionally, yes. Your executive function plummets. The GRACE protocol is the intentional, strategic practice of actively lowering your expectations on a bad day. You give yourself permission to deliver a good enough lesson. You show a documentary. You hand out a simple worksheet.
You just survive the day.
You consciously conserve your dwindling resources. Showing yourself self-compassion isn't lazy. It keeps your brain online and prevents a full breakdown. A calm, emotionally regulated C+ teacher is infinitely more effective than a panicked, crying, burnt-out A+ teacher.
You cannot light the way for others if your own flame has entirely gone out. Which leads us to our final overarching section, the long game. We've talked about saving the day and saving your evening, but how do we save the week, and ultimately, how do you sustain a decades-long career? Let's start with the end of the class period. Chapter 10 introduces the 2-minute warning. The author refers to sudden stops as transition whiplash.
Imagine you are sitting at home, deeply engrossed in a fantastic novel, and someone walks into the room, snaps their fingers an inch from your face, and yells, "Stop reading right now! Put your shoes on, we are leaving this second."
I would be furious.
Your immediate, involuntary reaction is irritation, resistance, and disorientation. We do this to students dozens of times a day, and it repeatedly triggers their amygdala.
It causes an amygdala hijack. The sudden shift sparks a fight-or-flight response, which leads to defiance.
Yes, the human brain requires processing time for cognitive set shifting. It has to cleanly deactivate the neural pathways dedicated to the current task and slowly reactivate the pathways required for the next one. A phased verbal countdown giving a 2-minute warning, then a 1-minute warning, then 30 seconds provides a necessary neurological runway.
It eases them into it.
It overcomes task set inertia, allowing the student to reach a natural closure point safely without feeling attacked.
A plane that glides onto a long runway is always better than one that crashes abruptly into the terminal building. And we need a runway for the end of the week, too. Chapter 18 details the Friday reflection. Most people just want to survive until the final bell rings on Friday and then sprint to their cars. But the author says you must take the last 10 minutes of the week to read micro-wins from a physical good news jar.
This is a direct, brilliant application of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman's peak-end rule. Kahneman discovered that human memory does not mathematically average the total experience of an event. Instead, our brains judge an experience almost entirely based on 2 moments: the most intense emotional peak and how the experience ultimately ends.
So even if Monday through Thursday was a chaotic, stressful nightmare, if Friday afternoon ends with a shared celebration,
The brain will retroactively recode the memory of the entire week as a much more positive, manageable experience. Furthermore, the physical act of expressing gratitude out loud triggers the dopamine-serotonin loop in the brain, providing a neurochemical counterbalance to the week's accumulated cortisol.
it's an antidote to the stress.
And doing it publicly in front of the class provides social proof, which builds collective efficacy, the shared, deeply held belief that the class as a whole is successful, resilient, and supportive.
And finally, for the ultimate long game of a decades-long career, we have Chapter 20, the legacy audit. The author addresses a profound occupational hazard he calls progress anemia. When you are a teacher, you pour your heart and soul into these young humans, but you almost never get to see the final product. You don't see the results of your labor for 10 or 20 years, if ever.
Which leaves the educator dangerously vulnerable to the brain's evolutionary negativity bias. Because we are wired to remember threats, you will vividly remember the one scathing, angry email from a parent, and you will completely forget the 30 kids who smiled and said thank you that same week.
So to combat that, you build an evidence folder, a physical high-status box or binder where you meticulously save every single thank you note, every crude drawing, every positive email from a parent, and every encouraging note from a colleague. And once a year, you lock your door, sit down, and audit your legacy. It's like building your own professional highlight reel, because you know for a fact that your brain's default biological setting is to only record the bloopers and the disasters.
It is a deliberate manual override of your biology to maintain what Dr. Barbara Fredrickson calls the 3-to-1 positivity ratio. It takes 3 positive emotions to lift us up for every 1 negative emotion that drags us down. The evidence folder also fulfills the core tenets of self-determination theory.
What are those tenets?
For a human to remain deeply motivated over the long term, they require 3 things: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. The evidence folder provides immediate, tangible, undeniable proof of your competence and your relatedness to the community. It bridges that massive years-long delay in the feedback loop, giving you the neurochemical reward of a job well done right when you need it most to prevent burnout.
Okay, let's unpack this entire incredible journey we've been on today. From holding shoes hostage for pencils, to Schrodinger's trash, to the psychological armor at the decoy desk, all the way to the legacy audit. If there's one overarching theme to this deep dive, it's that teaching, or frankly, managing any group of human beings anywhere, isn't about being a superhero with an endless well of patience.
Not at all.
It is about being a strategic architect of behavior. You have to master the physical logistics. You have to actively hack the neurochemistry of the room. You have to refine your visual and auditory communication. And above all else, you have to practice fierce, unapologetic self-compassion. That is how you move from just barely surviving a flawed system to truly mastering the craft of leadership.
It is entirely about designing an environment where both you and the people you're leading can predictably, safely succeed, regardless of the daily chaos that the world throws at you.
And that brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with. Consider that evidence folder from the legacy audit we just discussed. If you were to open an evidence folder of your own life right now, not your impressive resume, not your bank account balance, but the actual tangible human proof of your pro-social impact on the people around you. What is currently sitting in that folder? And more importantly, what intentional actions are you taking tomorrow morning to ensure that 10 years from now, that box is absolutely overflowing? The seeds you plant today are the shade you will sit under tomorrow. Keep planting. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.